I'm Richard Gottlieb, and I just wanted to tell you just for a minute what I do. I run Global Toy Experts, which is a consulting company. We consult with companies who want to do business in the United States and other countries, but primarily the U.S. at this time. I publish Global Toy News, which is a magazine of opinion on the toy industry, and Chris Byrne, who's going to be speaking a little later, and I are going to be starting a podcast next month called The Playground. So we hope you might want to listen to us. Okay. This is where, if you'll recall, this is where we left off. I would suggest to you that if you get a chance, check this out, this painting by Bruegel, Breugel, and just take some time and study it, because it's very, very interesting to look at and look in the corners. There's some really interesting and weird stuff going on. But it just shows you that everybody's always played. Okay, we just did this. Okay, you know, the real, where the action is in the world right now is in the EU, the United States, and China. And it's kind of like in the EU, there's all this stuff going on with Brexit and the UK right now. And it's a mess. And when I talk to people from the UK, they don't know what's going to happen. And so that's disrupted Europe. And in the United States, of course, we have a president who's different, and he's gotten us into a confrontation in China. And I can tell you, those of us in the toy industry do not want to be in a conflict with China. We love China. We have a lot of friends over here, for real. Okay, so I just said, so tariffs, and Rebecca Mon did a great job at talking about the whole tariff issue. I'm not going to dwell on it. I think she did a great job with it. But I do want to make this case, and I think this is an important graph. This is the value of global exports. And if you'll notice, you know, from 1800 to like 1950, there was very little activity. But after World War II, when the markets started opening up, you could just see how international trade went crazy. It just skyrocketed up. So the toy industry has always been an international industry. You may not know this, maybe you do. Prior to World War I, Germany dominated the world's toy manufacturing. As a matter of fact, at that time, Germany produced about 86% of the world's toys. So the toy industry went from Germany, moved to Japan, to Taiwan, to Hong Kong. It's in China now. It's always been an international business, and it's a business that we really have to protect, because let's just not assume that because it's always been there, it'll be protected. There are threats to free trade, and if you're in the toy industry, you're a free trader. Another challenge the toy industry is facing is declining birth rates. And I would like to remind you that, you know, we're a kid business still. We depend upon children. And what's incredible is that 2.01 is the replacement rate in a population. In other words, if you don't have 2.01 babies per household on average, your population will shrink. So right now, Colombia, Ireland, the United Kingdom, Sweden, the United States, Russia, China, even with all your babies, we are not replacing ourselves, which means that we are going to become smaller countries. And the fewer the babies we produce, it puts strains on the toy industry, which means that we are going to have to determine how we as an industry accommodate a world with fewer kids in it, particularly in developed countries. There's a couple ways we can do that. One is we can pay a lot of attention to the one area in which, at least in the United States, we're seeing an increase in births, and that is among first-time mothers, and that's women in their late 30s and early 40s. Now think about it for a minute. If you're a woman in your late 30s or early 40s, typically you've got your career established, you've got a relationship that's established, you've got a lot of money. So you've got money to spend. So this notion, at least we in the United States have, that $19.99 is the hot price point. Well, that's just considering kind of this whole thing. But if you're in this age group where you're more affluent, I frankly don't even know what the high price point is. It could be $100. It could be $49.99. It could be $69.99. So we have to find out what people in this particular cohort are willing to pay and what they're looking for in toys. I think this is really important. And by the way, I like questions, so as we go through, if you have a question, if you shoot your hand up, I'll answer it right away. Okay. Another problem that we're having in the States, I think more so than other places, is we're having a lot of store closings. I'm going to give you a couple headline here. This is from NBC News. It says, retail apocalypse, JCPenney, Payless, Lifeway announced 3,000 combined store closures. That was just a few days ago. And by the way, translators apocalypse, I don't know if you know what that means, but it's like the end of the world. Okay? And then it went on to say more than 41,000 people have lost their jobs in the retail industry so far this year, a 92% spike in layoffs since the same time last year. So what's happening? Well, in part, certainly, it's that, not even in part, a huge part of that is the fact that digital e-commerce is taking business away from traditional bricks and mortar markets. And think about it. If I've got a bricks and mortar retail store, I don't have to lose all my business to the internet. I just need to lose just enough that I can't pay for the rent on that real estate, that I can't support my infrastructure. So here is just a look at the store closing. Toys R Us, we lost 735 stores. Walgreens and Rite Aid are major drugstore chains that sell toys. We lost 600 stores there. Best Buy sells toys, a major electronics company. They closed 250. Kmart 109. I'm just looking down here at the ones. Sam's Club closed 63 stores. So as you can see, this is a serious issue for not just the toy industry, but really for the retail industry and for those of us who want to sell toys, so people can come in and actually touch them. Okay, number 4, a real challenge to traditional toys is video game. I mentioned earlier the impact that some of these new video games is having on the toy industry. Netflix cited the other day that Fortnite is their biggest threat. Not HBO, not other television networks. Fortnite. And the reason is that Netflix believes, and I think they're right, that they're in the eyeball business. That their business is getting people to watch. And there are more people watching Fortnite than are watching Netflix. And that's pretty amazing. And it makes you have to think to yourself, what business am I in? Maybe I'm not just in the toy industry. So this is another extremely important issue that we confront. And here's a picture of Fortnite. Is everybody familiar with Fortnite? Yes. Get out of here. Really? Some people? Oh, okay. Fortnite is a video game that has just consumed children's, teens, tweens, adults. They play for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. Believe me, it is costing you business, because if they're looking at a screen playing Fortnite, then they're not at home playing with toys. And I would say, however, going back to licensing, which we heard about a little earlier today, Jazzwares has the rights, has licensed the right to Fortnite stores, and they're having a really good time. Fortnite toys, so they're having a really good time. So be really aware of this video game industry. And by the way, in 2022, it is said that PlayStation and Xbox are coming out with new consoles. And whenever there's a new console release, it hurts the toy industry. Okay, so we're in China. So what are the opportunities for China? Well, I just want to take a second and let's compare a few things about China and the U.S. First of all, total population of China is 1.4 billion, and the U.S. is 322 million. So China is about, what is that, 5 times bigger, I guess? Population of children 0 to 12 in China is 207 million. In the U.S., it's 52.5. So again, about 5-6 times bigger here. And then I'm not going to go into each of these things, but I would say to you that the estimated expenditure on toys per child in China is $52 a child on average. And I went the wrong way. And it's coming. And in the U.S., it's $515. Okay, so I just want you to get across to you what's happening here is that China has more people, but the spend per child is still much lower, much lower than the U.S. So one of the things we want to watch for coming up is we know China has more people. But is this average spend per dollar of $52, how much is that going to go up? And if that goes up any appreciable amount, it's going to have a huge impact. I think much more than having more babies. This is the key thing to watch, is expenditure per child. So what does China have going for it? Well, it's got this growing child population. It's got growing consumer markets. Got some strong retailers like Toys R Us today. It has a lot of underserved markets, large parts of the country that really still haven't been hit by this wave of consumerism. But there are challenges. And I think the biggest challenge for China faces, at least in the West, is a lack of knowledge of China's consumer toy markets. I could just tell you that to watch if you are not Chinese and you are trying to understand this market, and it changes while you watch it. It's not a photograph, it's a movie, and it's moving. It's really hard. And so that's a real problem. How do we get people educated about the Chinese toy economy, and how do we make them confident enough to come in? And two, there's this fear of intellectual property theft. I'm really happy to hear today about from people that there's more and more intellectual property being created in China, which means that people in China, enforcement is going to be stronger on protecting intellectual property rights. So the solutions for the challenges China faces are education. We've got to educate Western toy manufacturers about doing business in China. I think we need to even educate Chinese manufacturers a little bit about the American consumer. I still think there's some missing pieces there. We got to communicate a lot better. We go to these trade shows. We're so business buying and selling, we don't talk to each other. Not about the stuff that really counts, you know? And we need more communication. We need mentoring. We need people in China, as an example, who care a lot about the Chinese toy economy, being willing to teach Americans, maybe come to America, speak, talk about it, explain how it all works. So I'm Richard Gottlieb. Thank you for listening to the second part of my presentation today.